Hey guys, welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. This is where we talk about everything and anything cannabis and try to give you the best information we can so you can make really good, conscious decisions for your family or yourself as you navigate really the rough landscape of dispensaries these days. And also some of you out there who, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to say it for the millionth time, but the black market and gray market, as much as some of you may think they're your friend, and maybe some of you maybe have friends that are growing things in the black market and gray market, I'm going to tell you, at least if you go to a state-run, in most states, or state-licensed dispensary, the dispensaries are required to provide a COA with the product that you buy. And if you don't get a COA, then don't buy it. I mean, it's just that simple. And I would suggest to you that because there's so many issues going on and there's so much garbage in the marketplace in states like Georgia, states like, Maryland, states like, Massachusetts, you have a lot of gray market and black market products out there that have THC, Delta 8 and Delta 10, and, who knows what they're going to make up next week. And a lot of these products are made using some really, 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 really bad components, stuff from right underneath your sink. Okay. And some people are making this stuff in their garages, and some people are making this stuff in their basements, and they're providing it to you in nice, nifty little packaging, making you think that it's legitimate, but it's not. So please be careful. And somebody to help me maybe amplify what I'm trying to say is a guest that I am so thrilled to have back on the show. He's a familiar face on our show, a figure who can keep any conversation engaging for hours. And if you missed his backstory about a near-death experience that he had due to illegal market products, see what I'm talking about? From the last time, I highly recommend that you go back and you check out that episode. As a front runner in the world of cannabis research and policy advocacy, he's the president and founder of Cannabis Science Institute. He will be imparting some wisdom on how to ensure our cannabis intake maintains top-notch quality and safety. He'll also be discussing what we as a community can do to help normalize cannabis use. And, by the time we get to the end, I'm always telling you, stay frosty, make sure you pay attention, make sure you educate yourself, but make sure you get involved. Come on now, we're getting closer and closer to an election, and I'm not picking sides. As much as I want to, and I want to engage in this conversation. I think if I engage in a conversation about which side to pick, it's going to just detract from what I'm trying to really get across, and that's a message about safe access to efficacious medication. So, doesn't matter to me who wins. Yeah, it does, but I'm going to say I'm not going to pick who wins. But both sides have had some really shady background when it comes to endorsing or not endorsing or thinking about making cannabis legal or not making it legal. I think you got one side who's dealing with some issues with their family, having had drug addiction in their family, and maybe a little bit over concerned. And please, I'm not casting any aspersions. I am pointing a finger, but I'm not pointing the direct finger saying that, be careful of this guy. But, until this current administration proves to me that they can be cannabis friendly, I don't believe they are, and don't think that they even have the people on their staff to help educate them enough. They need people like my guest, who is Dr. Jeff Rawson. That's who should be on the staff right now in the White House. And Dr. Rawson, let me tell you something, sir. It is an honor to have you back on the show, sir.
It's such an honor to be here. Thanks for having me, Montel.
Absolutely. And, before we jump in, I got to finish this little thought now. And if you go after the other guy, I'm going to tell you that I guarantee you what'll probably happen. Yeah, he may jump on the cannabis bandwagon because he's just trying to grab some extra votes, but he's not going to actually do anything until, Uday and Kusei, his two sons, get involved in the business, or his daughter gets involved in the business, or his son-in-law gets involved in the business, so they can make money. As long as he's making money off of it, then it might be something that they might, allow us all to have. And that should not be what drives this. What drives this should be people, again, I'm sorry, Dr. Rawson, I'm not throwing you under the bus, buddy, but I'm telling you, I think our peeps need to really pay attention to what you're doing, because you're the guy who's out here trying your damnedest to help keep us all safe by giving us the information that we need to do so. So again, I would say it right off the jump. Thank you so much for being back. And I'm sure I'm not going to finish the conversation I want to have with you right now. So I'm going to have you back again, but that'll be at a future date. So let's get busy and talk about some things in cannabis that we didn't get an opportunity to really delve deeply into in our last podcast, I want to jump right in and say, why don't you talk a little bit about, the issue of pesticides in cannabis? What are your main concerns regarding pesticides in cannabis cultivation?
Yeah, cannabis cultivation, it can be pretty intensive on pesticides, and pesticides are one of the hardest subjects to discuss because the way that pesticides work in American agriculture is that they always have to be certified for each particular use. And that certification for purpose needs to be based on scientific data. But we don't have much scientific data at all about using pesticides on cannabis. For example,
We don't have much real scientific research on cannabis, period, do we? I mean, because
no,
we've been thwarted from being able to even study cannabis. And when you talk about the fact that, and just please, sir, I'm not, I'm just going to add a little something for some of my listeners who may not understand some of what you're saying. Folks out there, if I'm a farmer and I'm growing tomatoes, there's one particular type of pesticide I need to use on tomatoes, maybe, because we know that after testing those pesticides, we know that it doesn't permeate the skin of the tomato. And if you take it home, you can wash it off and get most of it off. There's a certain types of pesticides. I just was blown away the other day when I heard about something I got in my refrigerator right now. Made me so angry last night because I don't know. I woke up. This is so funny. I try not to eat a lot of sweets. I really do. But we all, got that sweet tooth. It's there for a reason. So, every now and then, what I'll do is I'll go, instead of eating ice cream tonight, or instead of eating a chocolate candy, or instead of eating this thing, I'll try to eat some fruit. So I eat a lot of apples. I try to eat a lot of applesauce, which not necessarily is the best for you either, but I eat applesauce and unsweetened applesauce. And then I also eat strawberries. Now, I was reading an article yesterday talking about the fact that strawberries probably have, out of all the fruits that you can get at the grocery store, they seem to retain more of the residual pesticide than any other fruit that you can get out of a grocery store. That's insane to me. And I don't know why it woke me up last night, but the first thing I did, I got up this morning before I even had my breakfast. When I opened up my refrigerator door, I was going to make some eggs and some stuff, and I looked inside and I saw my strawberries. I pulled those strawberries out, took out a strainer, dumped them on a strainer, and I just sit there, washed each one of them off again, washed them off again. Yeah, which you should do. Now, that's a little bit of an over exaggeration of, not over exaggeration, but that's really being, I guess I'll say, over nuking this issue. But the truth of the matter is, there is enough residual pesticide on 10 strawberries that, that's cumulative. So if I eat that over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, I eat 10 strawberries every 3 or 4 days, I'm putting pesticides in my body, right, sir?
yeah, that's true. That's true. And when you're using a pesticide for some kind of approved use in agriculture, there's data that exists that connects a particular use, so an amount that they apply, to a residue that the consumer experiences, right? So they kind of, they should figure out what's safe, and that's what's been done. Like, for the most easy to compare product is tobacco, right? So they did experiments where they actually determined how much pesticide residue gets into the smoke when you spray a certain amount on the plants at a certain time, right? So if you want to certify pesticides for use in cannabis, you need to be able to tell someone what's a safe dose and when they can spray the plant with it. And that
And,
needs to be based on data.
Well, have you looked? I guess I know that's what your organization is attempting to do now. But I mean, and then it would probably almost be impossible because there are so many different strains, so many different growers, so many people providing product to not only the black and gray market, but so many different people providing product to the legal market.
Yeah.
And we have no idea. You have some grower that claims, well, I am a homeopathic grower and I make sure that all of my plants are grown. Yeah, come on, homie. If I come and hang out at your farm for 5 days in a row, you're going out there and spraying something.
Yeah.
So, had we determined in some cases what the level of toxicity is for some pesticides?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you're definitely right that a lot more people talk the talk than walk the walk when it comes to like nice, clean cannabis growing. Um, you know, yeah, the in a few cases, the impacts, the health hazards of smoking a pesticide might actually be known. Um, but in a lot of cases, they aren't. And in a few cases, the transmission of pesticide into the smoke has been studied, but it's not been done systematically yet. So, part of what we've done, like on our institute website, we've put up this explainer about pesticides that are used in cannabis production, and the way that we know that those are pesticides that are used in cannabis production is because those are all pesticides that have been found in cannabis testing. And so, there are a couple of interesting things that I've learned from doing this. I've kind of assembled the list from multiple sources, but especially, man, like the most I know now, what's by far it must be the most common pesticide in cannabis cultivation, and it's a fungicide called myclobutanil, and people use it, I think, for bud rot, um, or powdery mildew. Um, and I guess those are like exceptionally challenging issues in cannabis cultivation because myclobutanil shows up all the time. I've seen it in multiple studies. It
When I
seems like,
get a COA, but if I look at the packaging on some of my products that I get and I get
mhm.
a COA on it, sometimes it doesn't tell me anything like that. It shows me all the component parts
Yeah.
that go with the cannabis, but it doesn't tell me that. So does it mean it's still probably there anyway?
So that is going to really depend on the enforcement behind it. Definitely, if a product tests positive for one of these pesticides, it should not be put on the shelf. Almost every state has a threshold of non-detect on pesticides.
And we're talking about even if you see it on a COA that says 1 part per billion, 1 part per trillion,
Yeah.
no, right?
No, no, it should be 0.
Got it. Got
Yeah,
it.
it should
Got
be
it.
0 in most states. Definitely that's the case in Massachusetts, and, yeah, and when you buy a product, when you request your certificate of analysis, that's the best thing that you can do to protect yourself, all right? Because you can see a lot of information about that testing, and, you can I mean, for one thing, the certificate of analysis, it tells you the lab, all right. It tells you the date that the cannabis was tested. And that's really useful for consumers. Sometimes you might get some weed, you don't realize that it was tested more than a year ago,
Right.
right? It's really pretty old. So that's information any consumer can use. And
And just hit that for a second because I
sure.
recently found out, there are a couple dispensaries that are literally they keep product even long beyond what their provider, whoever was the person that sold it to them, said to keep on the shelf. So they'll keep it till they get rid of it. But most people don't understand that not only is a pesticide there, does a pesticide become over time, let's say, more virulent within the plant, and also let people know that the plant also becomes less effective over time like that, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Generally speaking, cannabis compounds gradually decay over time. So they definitely um, I think that in ideal storage conditions, there might not be very much degradation, but you're definitely losing potency as you keep it over a year. And some pesticides do have harmful breakdown products. A lot of that has not been studied in this case, but like the myclobutanil that I mentioned before, right? That actually it's been demonstrated that when you heat it up, it liberates cyanide. So there are some dangers from decomposition of pesticides and from heating them.
So, Dr. Rosen, how much of that pesticide stays inside of a person, or can we determine how much of it? I mean, I can understand you can catch it in the smoke, but do we know that it for sure goes inside? And if it does, how long does it stay inside?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So that question has been asked actually for the case of tobacco and some pesticides in tobacco. And in old studies, what they would actually do, I mean, it's kind of amazing they would really do this. They would take cigarettes, they would treat them with a pesticide, but they'd use a radio labeled one. So it's radioactive. And they'd have people smoke it.
Whoa.
Test subjects, they would test the radiation levels in their bodies to find out how much of the pesticide was retained.
We call this science, or we call this torture? Sorry.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, right? They really did that. So, yeah, like obviously, I mean, we can't do that now. Nobody's, so, but yeah, it's a lot of work to characterize pesticides and their impact on health in all kinds of agriculture. And in fact, a lot of the regulation of pesticides is, a lot of the most restricted pesticides are restricted because of their environmental impact rather than their impact on human health.
Yeah, and the regulatory gray areas are a recurring theme in this industry. I mean,
Yeah.
from everything from whether or not it affects the person or whether it affects the ground. I mean, we got a product here that is known because of its nature to have the ability to leach, toxic substances, heavy metals, and things out of the ground. So we're already dealing with a plant that has inherently some issues with picking up deleterious kinds of substances and having it flow through the plant. But when you add this extra layer on it, are we determining that, is there any kind of pesticide that might be okay for cannabis?
Well, I mean, probably, but I think that's like the really, I mean, first of all, there are some treatments that are sort of like natural preparations, or extracts of plants that are sort of considered like generally safe. So there are a few things that people are allowed to use, but this is a really big obstacle, right? And I think that like actually part of the challenge with it is that scientists don't have a list of pesticides to test, to do the science on, because cultivators don't want to discuss this subject. Nobody wants to admit what they use. So
Right.
that's like that there's actually kind of and in fact that's why it's hard to find information about pesticide use in cannabis, is because it's probably been the hardest subject for me to discuss.
And it's one that, like you just said, again, the industry is not doing itself a favor by hiding what it's using, because eventually this will be found out. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts that eventually the truth's going to come out.
Yeah. This is, I mean, this is what happens when you bring a product out of the shadows in the United States. Is right now it needs to be compliant with our laws. So that's
But
actually a big challenge, right?
but right on that note, though, that's part of, I think, not just the government's problem, that's the industry's problem. I mean, we don't police ourselves. We don't even try to say, let's come together and figure out how we can do this. We all are still sitting back there trying to figure out how can I beat the guy down the street.
Yeah. There's an adjustment in mentality that has to happen, like as cannabis is legalized and normalized, cannabis does not stay unchanged, right? Legalization changes cannabis too, right? So
Absolutely.
cannabis changes society, but also society changes it, because now we're inviting more people into the tent, right?
Right,
So
for sure.
the atmosphere in that tent is going to change, right? Like the
It
culture,
should change.
the culture of cannabis is going to have to modernize.
Absolutely. And I understand this. I mean, we're like, I've likened the cannabis industry to the hyperbaric industry in a sense. Hyperbarics was available in America for 20 years before, or for about 18 years before they started a national kind of a regulatory organization within themselves to say, let's get this right. And so now all of a sudden it's kind of taken off again. However, but there is now a national organization that kind of tries to govern itself. And we don't have that yet in cannabis. We have still, again, we're so disjointed that we don't even have it at the state level.
Yeah. And I think now probably a lot of people in the cannabis industry are trying to figure out what set of rules they're even going to try to follow.
Right.
Which ones apply.
Right. And which ones to promulgate. Okay, well, now let's talk a little bit about, some risks and health risks associated with things like mold or Aspergillus, or that's in the plant, that's naturally, not naturally, but occurs in the plant.
Yeah.
And people don't talk about that because there's some stuff on shelves in dispensaries that have both in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we know that many organisms that can grow in cannabis could be harmful. And the main reason that those organisms like mold are harmful is because as they grow in the cannabis flower, they poop in the cannabis flower. And their poop is actually the names of like bacterial and fungal compounds that they excrete are called toxins. So there are toxins, mycotoxins. Um, so the reason we don't want moldy weed is because of the mold chemicals, right? These toxins that the mold puts in the weed. And probably exposure to those compounds increases your risk of cancer. In fact, that's been shown that, people who breathe in a lot of those compounds have a higher risk of cancer. So there are definitely like long-term risks that could be a significant factor in the overall health risk of smoking cannabis. There are also, the the other the other problem that has occasionally happened is some people have actually gotten acute infections from cannabis, and that's really scary. But we've only seen case studies of it, so we don't know how common it is. Those
And
are,
people are,
I think, it was.
they're not reporting it that much.
Yeah, yeah, but I've also had, so I've had the experience of buying some products and having them tested and also sampling them myself. And in doing that, I had one batch of cannabis that I bought and I tested it, and I took notes of my reviews, and I did all of my reviews before I got the test results. And I noted in my notebook that this batch of cannabis, it tasted bad and it gave me a headache.
Mm.
And it turned out when I got the results back that that was the one batch that tested really high in some gross bacteria. It had enterobacter and, yeah, a bunch of like kind of yuck, like food spoilage bacteria, really gross stuff.
Is
So,
there, are there any kind of at-home test kits that people could use to test their product before they smoke it?
boy, I really don't think so. Not for any of those hazards.
I mean, I just think wouldn't it be so easy, or I don't know if it'd be easy or the
Yeah.
science, but make something that I get my weed, bring it home, break off a piece out of the bag or out of the container, drop it in something, shake it up. If it turns red, don't smoke it. If it turns yellow, you got something going on. If it turns green, good to go.
Oh man, I'd love it if it was easy. It's probably a lot of scientific work to make that
Right.
to make it easy for the user. But there actually is a in Massachusetts, at least, there's actually one testing lab. I'll give a shout out to ProVerde Labs and Chris Hudella, and
Okay.
they will test your weed for microbial contaminants for free.
Really?
Walk-ins, yeah.
You just got to get it to them.
Yep, they'll take a walk-in. So if you're in Massachusetts and you're really curious, you can bring them. You can bring cannabis to ProVerde Labs anytime. They'll test a walk-in for free.
Wow. Wow. That's great. Okay. Now, what should medical professionals and patients be mindful of when they're considering cannabis as, a treatment option?
Well, I think definitely they should consider where they're buying it from. That's really important, and I agree with you. Like I hate to be that rule following guy, but the products that they sell in dispensaries are by far the most scrutinized, and they tend to be grown by the most careful people who are the most rule following also. And that's probably the weed you really want. You probably want the weed that's grown by the guy that wants to follow the rules. So I think the sourcing is really important. I think that it's important for people to recognize and understand the I don't want to be a fear monger, right? But
Mhm.
that there are some labeling concerns right now, that they need to look at the dosing, that they need to look at the label a little skeptically. If they're dosing based on a percentage of THC, they should bear in mind that those percentages are often overstated on packages.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, I mean, let's say, you know, I'm a patient and, I'm thinking about the fact that I've heard that cannabis may work for XYZ or it may have some impact on XYZ, and I want to go down to a dispensary and see if they have a quality product. Should I be thinking more in terms of edibles, and how do some of these contaminants differ when you eat them rather than smoke them?
That's a good question.
Hmm.
Because your your cannabis flower, your cannabis flower that you're smoking, right? It has a lot of compounds in it, and in order to make an edible, right, they'll extract the cannabis compounds and usually do some additional purification, and they'll end up with something with an oil that's usually called distillate because they usually distill it before they do it. So in that purification process, you might leave behind a lot of harmful chemicals, but you actually might enrich some harmful chemicals because
Enrich them.
yeah, because as you're when you extract the cannabinoid compounds, that extraction can also um, selectively extract, say, pesticide residues. So in some cases, the concentrations of harmful compounds could actually be higher in like a vape cart.
Really?
Yeah, but and it's been studied a little bit. So a few a few people have purchased vape carts and tested them and found pesticide residue or mycotoxin residue in them. But we really don't know how prevalent that is. In our state, those products are required to be tested. That's part of the testing requirements, and so we have at least some defense against it.
Hmm.
But uh, but that's a this is these are and again, right, I think you know it doesn't look like a bunch of people are dropping dead from these things, right? So it's not that they're it's your risk isn't that you're going to smoke a joint and then keel over, right? Your
If you're drinking over time, you're going to get sick.
yeah that possible, I mean, this is also possibly true with tobacco, right? That one factor in its carcinogenic effect on humans is just the fact that it's smoke. But one of the factors in its carcinogenic effect is all the mold and pesticide residues and stuff like that. That could be a big part of the ultimate health risk from cannabis. And so if you clean that stuff up, it would have a major public health impact, right? You could
Wow.
have like lower rates of cancer over time, right?
Sure. And I mean, now, okay, we're talking this time. Let's change subjects just for a second and kind
Mhm.
of go to the aspect of cannabis normalization. I mean, what's your take on how we can normalize cannabis while pursuing the public's interest and making sure that it stays safe and taking into public's health considerations?
Yeah, that's really important. For me, I think probably normal. I mean, consumer safety is what I really care about most, but normalization matters a lot to me at this point. Like a few years ago, I published a column where I outed myself as a cannabis user, and that impacts my relationships with other academic scientists in some cases. Like there are some people who have always looked at me differently ever since then.
Right.
So normalization matters to me personally very much because I'm through the door now and I can't go back.
Well,
Um,
but I got to tell you something. I don't think there is a person in America who knows me or knows who I am, and there's a lot of them, about 90 million of them who have, at one point in time sampled my show.
sure.
So, there's a lot of them that know me, and out of that 90 million that know me, I think almost to the letter, they all know that I've been a cannabis advocate for now 22 years. And instead of them looking at me with disdain, I have them looking at me more inquisitively, like, you really support us. Okay. So at least that's changed a little bit. And, it hasn't really changed the public's perception or I say reaction to me. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is like I'm still invited to speak at places like, I just spoke last week at the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm speaking in a couple of weeks to a whole group of, people in some very, very well-heeled people down here in Palm Beach area. They don't really, how do I explain it? It's like sometimes when I'm talking to, admirals, generals, leaders of our nation, they just kind of go, let that go right past their head. I mean,
Yeah.
and they know that I'm a supporter, but they, okay, I got you. It's your thing.
Yeah, yeah, and believe me, I see the stigma getting weaker every day, and and I'm glad you've had those experiences, and I've seen it also. Actually, right, some of the, I mean, one of the most enlightened people uh, was my academic advisor, who was, I think, I mean, he's an 82-year-old chemist who was my boss, right?
Mhm.
He was plenty enlightened about it, right? So, plenty of people are, but I also, science is kind of a conservative field, and yeah, people can be pretty judgmental sometimes. It's funny politics. So,
Yeah, yeah. And especially in the medical field, science field. I mean, you know this for a fact. Everything that's a transformative in medicine or science is always met with some of the most extreme and adamant resistance, just because.
yeah,
And I say that way, it's like no matter what, it's just because. I mean, when they first created the first MRI machine, I remember all of the back and forth about, oh, well, you're putting a person in and the magnets are spinning around and the blood's got iron and it's going to end up making people. It's like, stop. So, we complain about anything. We complain about PET scans, SPECT scans. We complain about everything there is. Now we found out recently that some of the stuff that we had been doing with MRIs or with those kind of machines has been wrong by putting people, putting was a gallidium, or I can't remember the name of the term. Um,
gadolinium,
Gadolinium, yeah.
the
Instead of
contrast. Yeah,
yeah, instead of put, now they're starting to recognize that the machines are powerful enough now that you don't need to have that contrasting, and so therefore you don't need to radiate people the way we have been radiating people over time. But no one's going back to day one of, well, we should throw the machines away because it's going to cause an earthquake. That's I can remember. I can remember way back in the day when they put one of the first machines. I was in Annapolis at the Naval Academy when I think they started actually wide using the MRIs, and there were people talking about the fact that it's going to rip a person's blood cells through their skin. I was like, oh, come on now. And now 30 years later, they've almost doubled the strength of the MRI, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good point. New medical technology, and I mean, I actually, I can sympathize a little bit because I'm one of those people. Sometimes, like, I don't like the hype. So when something's new and really hypey, I have a habit to sometimes be kind of critical of it. So
Sure.
I can understand that, but I think ultimately, like, what's continuing to reduce the stigma, partly it's just going to keep happening on its own, but but normalization is still a challenge, and I think
But,
we
but
still see we still see, like, for example, our in Massachusetts, we have a state agency in charge of cannabis control, right? We have a cannabis control commission. Most states have that. Our state agency for cannabis control is easily the most spectacular failure in our state government of the last 10 years.
in
But
what way? In what ways? Tell
oh
us.
man, it's a total, I mean, it's a total failure of enforcement. Um, it's literally structured. It's structured in a way so that it can't work. It's not clear who's the boss because they have
Mhm.
5 commissioners and also an executive director. Um, they've spent a lot of their enforcement priorities on, trying to stop diversion, which doesn't happen.
Right. Right.
Right, and not from Mass. It's not diversion from Massachusetts market isn't profitable, so it doesn't happen.
Right.
And yeah, so they've just been, and they've been incredibly anti-transparent, and they've had very bad science policy. So their science policy has been terrible. So they've had a lot of trouble, and these kinds of, and they've had scandals that would be a really big deal in any other state agency, but it's because it's the weed agency, so everyone it's harder to make people care.
Right.
It's really,
Right.
it's still there.
That's insane. And now let's talk a little bit about the future of cannabis legislation, and even the current legislation. Well, first off, I think normalization will start to happen here as we start to get impacted by the normalization that's taking place around the world. I mean,
Yeah.
in a way, we just had Germany just make cannabis legal, though they say they're going to look at this as a test, but they made it legal for adult consumption. It's a little sketchy on how you get to consume, or not necessarily how you get to consume, but how you can buy it. I mean, for Germans, you have to belong to some collective, and it can't be more than 500 people in per collective. So they're probably going to end up with 1,000 collectives in the country. And then, what do people do that are coming, or tourists who want to sample the German, cannabis industry? Do they have to make friends with somebody who's a member of a collective before they can't buy it from them, but they can get some from them? It's so weird. However, as Germany goes, I think the rest of the EU will go, because
Yeah.
you've already got Amsterdam, you already got Isle of Man, you already got Spain, you already got England in some ways. I think you have Scotland in medical ways. So, the EU is going to, in the next 5 or 6 years, I think, will completely shift, because nobody's going to want to have their citizenry crossing borders to go get something that they can't get at home. And, I think we're probably no more than 3 or 4 states from having to do something at the federal level here, though we should have already done it at the federal level here,
Yeah.
being at 38 states in the District of Columbia. But I think the stupidity is going to make us get to 41 states and the District of Columbia for the national uh, government, our federal government decides to take a real serious stand.
Yeah.
Um, but the legislation, as things trickle out, the more and more as they trickle, more states come online allowing for it, and then there's that real weird gray area of crossing state lines. I mean, you can go out of Mass and go up to Maine. You can go out of Mass and
Mhm.
go down to Connecticut. You can go out of Connecticut and go down to New York. You can go across to New Jersey. You can go across to Maryland, Ohio. I mean, it's like it's going to get tougher and tougher as we get some of these states that are in close proximity allowing for sales 15 miles across the border.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one of the big motivations, like one of the arguments that people made to start legalizing cannabis, was an argument actually of public health, right? That like it's not good for people if you have a drug like this that lots of people are using. It's not good for us to be getting it from clandestine sources and secret sources. It would be better to have it in a regulated market. That would be a public health benefit. So, one of the most important things to do now is to prove that that's actually true. And we can now. The information is basically out there now, right? Like we've got products for sale in gas stations, and then we got other products for sale in dispensaries. And so, yeah, part of the Institute's work now is we're gathering products from these different markets and comparing them to actually demonstrate that there are systematic differences. When you buy stuff from the black market, it's way more likely to be contaminated or to be a low quality product.
And that's something that we've got to get the feds to listen to. We've got to get them to
Yeah.
understand, if they do more work in helping us validate the purity of what's being sold, help us come up with some SOPs to ensure that the products that people have access to are more efficacious, or at least are not there to do any harm from a contamination standpoint. I think we find better outcomes all along, and then we need to start testing every aspect of the product. I mean, I think more science and more science and more science, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely what we need. I mean, I think one of the important things for us to all remember now is that there are enough Americans using cannabis today so that anything that we do that improves their health outcomes or protects their health will have a savings that we can appreciate as an entire society. All right. Like we're talking about a significant portion of the population. If we substantially reduce their risk of cancer, help them avoid different harms, that's saving us all money.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, saving us all money. So, before I let you get out of here, let's talk a little bit about what's going on at the Fed level, which is the biggest discussion that's happening around the country, and that's the idea of rescheduling versus, descheduling versus rescheduling. Which side do you fall on?
Oh man, I mean, I say deschedule all the way, man. Like,
Right.
you know, I mean, it is a fact that sudden legalization without any regulatory like preparation is kind of its own risk. And we see that with the proliferation of these black and gray market products, that they tend to be a little bit more risky. But I think also we're at a point now where there is so much cannabis out there in America, like you should just deschedule it, man.
Yep. Yep. I think so. And I think if we did go the route of descheduling, you know, we can, I would think we would see more folks apt to trying to really clean their product up so that they can attract a bigger share of the marketplace, understanding that there's been tested, has been gone through rigorous trials and those kinds of things, rather than reschedule, turn it over to the FDA, and they don't know what the hell they're doing. So, I mean, you know, I mean, I really wouldn't want to have anything to do with any product that is being provided to me by a group of people who said for 100 years it doesn't work. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm not going to trust the FDA when they're the ones who have been trying to keep their foot on the throats of the cannabis industry.
Yeah. Well, you know, there has been some development in the culture in some of our federal agencies, and I've met some good scientists in FDA and in NIDA and in NIH. So there are some people who have a more progressive view of cannabis, and those, you know, those federal agencies are not totally monolithic, but yeah, they, you know, I mean, they're also not prepared to regulate this, right? I mean,
Right.
they're, you know, I mean, they're really not even prepared to regulate CBD.
Right. Right.
The
That's
FDA
right.
says so, you know. So, you know, this is hard. I mean, it actually, you know, partly it actually is hard, but you know, partly, yeah, we do have a little bit of a lack of vision. I think that Schedule 3 is kind of a half measure. It, you know, it could solve tax problems for businesses, right? Businesses could claim expenses on their income taxes, and it's definitely going to smooth out the pharmaceutical pipeline. So,
But that's right. But see what you
no,
just
but
did
I'm
is
not sure who that helps, right? I mean, I think, you know,
right.
Schedule 3 is mainly a gift. It's mainly a gift to the people who are selling hemp cannabinoids, I think, kind of, right?
And also at the same time, if it goes Schedule 3, then it must be delivered to you through prescription. If it has to be delivered through prescription, that means that doctors who have been against it will have to get on board it, and other doctors. You know, I just see that's like a quagmire that we don't want to get into. I really don't. And you know, there's so many people out there going, "Yeah, if we can reschedule to Schedule 3, everything's not going to be okay." This is just an opportunity for big business to want to come in and see if they can do the same thing they did with cigarettes, and that's how, you know. So we need to get back to this idea of providing something that is overseen by the idea of safety for all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Schedule 3, it's like it seems to me like it's a step a little bit in the right direction, but also down a dead end. You know,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Look, so we're almost out of time. And again, like I say, I love having conversations with you. So you always have an open invitation here. And I'm sure that your two podcasts are going to blow up like no tomorrow. Before you take off and before we end, got any parting words for our listeners?
parting words for the listeners. Well, definitely enjoy your cannabis responsibly. All right. Request your certificate of analysis when you buy it. That shows the dispensary that you care. All right. And you train them. You train them that that's something that shoppers expect.
Right. If you don't get it, just turn around and walk out the door. Just say, okay, never mind. If you don't have one, I'm not
well, you know, always be polite to the people there
gonna. Sure.
because they just work there.
Right.
Right. But, you know, that's like, yeah, right. A good, you know, a better dispensary. I've been to some dispensaries where they are ready for that
Right.
question.
Right.
And that's impressive to me. You know, that's good customer service. I want to teach this world that that's part of customer service.
There we go. For sure. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Rawson, for being part of the show today and sharing your expertise and your insights to our listeners. I want them to make sure that, you know, this has been, again, another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. You can go back and see both episodes with Dr. Rawson, and I suggest you go through them both because it's a wealth of information. It's like, blow your brain with how much he's been able to provide in just 2 short hours. And we want to have you back for probably a third, sir. So, if we can, we'll reach out and see if you have some time to do another one in the future. And for all of you out there, please stay informed. Join us the next time. Stay well, stay healthy, stay blunt, okay? Thanks so much for being a part of this show. Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.